All right. So, again, just a reminder where we're at. We are in this section here. If you remember last week, we covered the power over nature. And just again, as just a quick recap, remember Jesus had been rejected as the Messiah by the Pharisees. They committed the unpardonable sin. He then started to teach the parables, which was the mystery kingdom, an explanation of that. And then right after that, he decides to leave because of the crowds, but also he decided to leave because he says he has to go to the other side, right? So they get into the boat. Of course, there's that massive storm. We looked at it last week, that was a demonically inspired storm. He muzzled it, literally muzzled Satan and his demons, and immediately the storm ceases. And I told you last week that was an example of the fact that he had been accused by the Pharisees of being able to do these miracles, but because he was demon possessed. And he said that a kingdom that is divided against itself cannot stand. And so one of the ways that he immediately starts to prove that is through the power over nature, where he literally muzzles Satan and his demons who are causing this. So that's one example of him actually being against the powers of Satan and the powers of demons. And then he's immediately going to follow it up with tonight's lesson, which is power of demons. So literally within less than 24 hours after he's been rejected on the grounds of being demon possessed, being in league with Satan, he does two things that show that in fact he is against Satan, and not only just against Satan, but he is more powerful than Satan and all of his demonic realm. So these two things put together are going to be super powerful to refute the claim that in fact Christ is able to do these things because he is demon possessed. All right, so we're going to start here by, I don't know why that is in the middle of this. It should be popped up here someplace. All right. We're going to start off by just reading Mark chapter 5. And the interesting thing about this is we've got this account in Matthew 8, Luke 8, and Mark 5. Normally, Mark is the one that truncates everything, right? Mark is action, 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 action. He's the one that doesn't necessarily cover as much. And so you go to like a Matthew, which tends to include more information, or a Luke. In this case, Luke and Mark give way more information than Matthew, and Mark actually gives us more information than what even Luke does. Which is kind of surprising because we're talking about some sickness caused because of demonic possession here. And normally you think that Luke might give the more full account, and he does give a full account, but just not as much as Mark. So we're going to read Mark's, but then as we get into each one of the sections, we're going to pull together Matthew and Luke so that you can compare the differences between them. So starting in Mark chapter 5, verse 1 through 20, it says, they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had had the legion, sitting there clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with them. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. All right, so pretty familiar passage. Hopefully you're going to see some things tonight that maybe you haven't seen before from reading through this. So let's kind of break this down here. Just kind of as an introduction, again, I've already kind of said this. Jesus has been accused of being demon possessed. He went ahead and showed his power over Satan by calming the sea, and now he's going to demonstrate his power over Satan again. The real point here is, yes, there are two demon possessed men that actually get healed, but the real point is that Christ has shown his sovereignty over and his actions against the kingdom of Satan, showing that in fact the demon possession charge is not true. Now, it's interesting that Jesus got in the boat and he always intended to come over here, right? It wasn't just that he got in a boat and somehow the storm got him off course and they just happened to wind up in some place. Because remember, they're out in the middle of the sea and Jesus calms it so it's completely still. Like they could have gone to any place. So obviously, Jesus is intending to go here, and he's intending to go here because he knows what he's going to get. He knows he's going to see these two demon-possessed men. He knows exactly what he's going to do, and he knows that by demonstrating power over Satan, it's going to prove that claim to be false. So this is very intentional, that what he is trying to do. And he's intending to heal. He shows that he's actually doing the work of God. Remember back in John chapter 3, that Nicodemus said that we know that you're from God because no one can do the things that you're doing. So again, he's going to do things now that God does. God doesn't possess people, demon possess them. He removes demon possession. He brings people from insanity back to sanity, right? So he's going to show all these different things, but he's also going to demonstrate God's grace to those that don't deserve it. It's very likely, we don't know the circumstances that the demon possession happened, but it's very likely these two men had opened themselves up to demon possession. That's usually the way things happen. There's an opening, whether through sin or some involvement in those types of things, but somehow, whatever it is, they're possessed. But they're not deserving of God's grace, and yet Jesus goes all the way across this Sea of Galilee to get there. The other thing to remember is that he's going into Gentile territory. Now, we don't know if these two men are Gentiles. Very likely, they are Gentiles. In fact, it's probably fairly certain they are, because this particular town, this particular region, was in Gentile territory. There were very few Jews that were there. In fact, the Jews, when they would say, in fact, when the text says that he went to the other side of the sea, that's actually a Jewish idiom for Gentile territory that is not kosher, right? So there's actually in the text itself the indication that he's going purposely into Gentile territory now, and these two men are likely Gentiles. Now, if you think about that from the Jewish mindset at the time, they're the people of God. The Gentiles are people that you don't associate with unless you absolutely have to, right? They're not deserving of God's love and God's grace, right? Particularly the Pharisees. The Pharisees only thought that Pharisees deserved that. But even the common Jew typically thought that only the Jews were deserving of God's grace. Here we have Jesus intentionally now going to a Gentile city, to two Gentiles, for the purpose of showing God's saving grace to these Gentiles. Now, that would have been shocking to the disciples. Remember, the disciples are with Christ. Now, the text doesn't say anything about what they might have been thinking, but if you can put yourself in the shoes of the disciples, they're probably wondering, what in the world is he doing here? First of all, talking to these Gentiles, and then secondly, extending grace to them, right? You know, that I can imagine there might have been some discussions among them about this whole thing here. All right. The other thing to kind of remember about this particular story is that while we've run into Christ doing exorcisms, there really hasn't been much detail. It's really been a demon-possessed man, and the man says something, or a demon-possessed man, and he's mute and deaf, but there's not really a description of what that looks like. What we see here is really the first description of what a demonically possessed person can look like, right? Now, these might be on the outer edges of that, because these two men apparently were so strong that they could not be bound, right, by chains or anything else. So they might be demonstrating, you know, what kind of the outer edge, the limit of what demonically possessed people could look like, but certainly they give an example of what happens when this occurs to an individual. So we get this rich detail, but also draws this contrast between the state of the people before Christ and the state of them after, right? And so it's not just these people are desperate, because when you take a look and see what their status was, it shows the incredible depth of God's grace and the salvation that he brought to them. Yes. Well, you want to take this one off? Thanks.
When Jesus approaches the man and the man speaks, I'm possessed. What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I fear you by God, do not torment me. He's possessed by multiple demons. That's not the man talking, is it?
We'll get to that in a moment.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll get to it in a moment. Yeah. Okay, great. So I just wanted you to kind of keep this in mind here about really what's going on. There's a lot of backstory to this this particular situation. All right, so that's just kind of as an introduction. Now we start out here again. We've read Mark's account, but if we add in Matthew and Luke, it says Matthew says, and when he came to the other side, to this country, the Gadarenes, and Luke says, then they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. Okay, so again, they're in the boat. They were on the west side of the Sea of Galilee when the unpardonable sin happened, and they were sailing across it. Now they're landing on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, right? This is where this area is. And there's the area there is called the Decapolis over there, which is, of course, 10 cities, this being sort of one of those in the Decapolis area. And it says it goes into the region of the Gerasenes. Now, there is some lack of clarity around what city this exactly is, right? Because it could be, right? It says they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, or the region of the Gerasenes. And then Matthew says it was to the country of the Gadarenes. So there's some difficulty in understanding exactly what town this is, okay? So we see kind of the difference in sort of spellings, and of course the Gadarenes is not the same as Gerasenes. So what do we mean here when the gospel account says that it was the region of the Gerasenes? Well, it probably refers to, there's a small town there called Gersa or Cursa, and that is on the eastern shore across from Galilee. So Galilee's on the west, and if you kind of go almost straight across, you're going to get to this town of Cursa or Gersa. Matthew mentions Gadarenes. There was also in that same area a town called Gadara, and that's kind of it's kind of this lower, if you go east side and kind of down, it's this kind of lower area of the Sea of Galilee. So it's also that region of the Gerasenes was likely the territory around Gersa. So you've got this region of the Gerasenes, and there's a town there called Gersa, and that town or that territory of Gersa belongs to sort of the city of Gadara, right? So there's a larger city, and then there's a smaller city called Gersa, and likely Gadara had control over Gersa, right? The name Gadarenes, it comes from the town of Gadara, and of course it was the capital of that region. That's the reason why you could have Gadara being a controlling city or a capital city in which the smaller city of Gersa could be part of in the region of the Gerasenes, right? So that's why it's very hard to tell exactly what it is. Most scholars will land on the fact that if you take a look at all the evidence of this, that it favors the town of Gersa, located on the lake's eastern shore. Now, it's not incredibly relevant for us to be able to identify exactly which town. All we need to really identify is it was in this Gentile area, right? And of course, we know it's a Gentile area because later on we're going to encounter pigs, which were not allowed in Jewish areas, right? So this is clearly going to be Gentile territory. Okay, now again, Mark tells us here that it says, when he stepped out of the boat, when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. Matthew says, and when he came to the other side to the country of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men met him coming out of the tombs, so fierce that no one could pass that way. Okay, well, was it 1 or was it 2, right? That's the question we got to ask, because obviously Matthew says there were 2 men, and Mark doesn't say there was only 1. He just says that he met a man, right? So it doesn't limit it to more than that, right? There were certainly 2 demon-possessed men, and there's no conflict or contradiction between the passages. Mark merely focuses on either the one that was more violent of the 2, perhaps the one that was in worse state than the other one, or he's focusing on the one that did the speaking. Because even though there are going to be around 6,000 demons possessing these 2 men, one of the men is the mouthpiece being used by the demons to communicate with Christ. So likely what is going on here is Matthew says there was 2 men, and one of those 2 is more prominent because he's the mouthpiece that the lead demon is actually going to be talking through. All right, so there's a question, I'll kind of answer this a little bit later on, but there's a question here about, is the demonic world just chaotic? They just kind of just a bunch of rabid beings going around and doing nothing. And I told you, I said, no, I think the Bible's pretty clear that the angelic realm, both the good angels and the fallen angels, have a hierarchical system. And there are ones that have higher positions than others. And I think clearly here, even from the story, even though that's not the intention of it, we have a demon that's speaking for the rest of the 6,000. So there's some sort of order that is imposed on the demonic realm. Okay. The other thing that has been proposed regarding this whole issue of why why there would have been 2 men there isn't because Matthew's trying to make it up, but because Matthew, writing to the Jewish people, since this was a demonstration of God's power over Satan, and it was a direct repudiation of the claim that he himself was demon-possessed, according to Jewish law, you needed 2 witnesses to witness that. So it's possible that Jesus intentionally chose this so that he would actually have 2 witnesses that could say, I was demon-possessed and I was set free from Christ, right? That's something that someone is that has been floated out there by scholars. Whether that's the case or not, we know there was at least 2. All right. And it says, as soon as Jesus got out of the boat, he encountered these 2 men with the evil spirits, right? So, I mean, he's literally, the boat has pulled in, and as soon as he steps out on the dry ground, they come running out of these tombs to meet him, right? Okay. Now, remember, he doesn't have to go find them. They find him, which is really, really odd when you think about it. Sometimes I always ask these questions like, that seems kind of odd. There's certain things in the Bible you're like, that's really strange. This is one of those strange ones, because if you've got 2 demon-possessed men, the last thing they want to do is be around Christ, but yet they actually come to him, right? And I think there's a reason for that the demons clearly state later on, which again is going to show Jesus's extreme, ultimate, omnipotent power over the demonic realm, right? Okay. But as soon as he steps foot on the ground, they come running out of these tombs. Now, these tombs, we shouldn't think of this like this weird kind of a cemetery. We got these tombstones up, and there's little iron fence and whatever else. Like these are caves built into the hillsides, the rocks, the cliffs that are surrounding the sea there. They've been built out, and they were used for tombs, but they were also used as places to cast outcasts. Not just demonized, but also people that might be suffering from like leprosy and things like that. It was a place to put people that were not allowed to be in society would be able to find some refuge out in these tombs, right? So this is where these 2 men have spent some portion of their life, is out here. When we take a look at Mark's account again, this is the one that has the most detailed information. I just want you to sort of pay attention, because when you think about the reaction of the man who is healed. Jesus is going to ask him to do something pretty significant, and he does it. And the question should be, why? And I think the answer to that is when you look at his state prior to Christ healing them and his state after, the contrast couldn't be greater. It's hard for me to think of another example in Scripture where you went from one extreme of being in need to the other extreme of being completely freed and being taken care of than you have with these two gentlemen, right? So if we pay attention here to this, they lived in tombs, right? They're outcast. They were uncontrollable. Again, they can't even control themselves. The men can't control them. They're being controlled by demons. So imagine being literally having some other entity controlling you, and you've got nothing that you can do about it. They're being controlled. They cannot be subdued. The Greek word there's damazo, which means to tame a wild animal. They cannot be tamed, right? Not even with shackles or with chains. So in other words, they've got such incredible strength, not from their human strength, but because of the demonic strength, that it's impossible to keep these two gentlemen bound. Now, if you're thinking about the townspeople, I just want you to put a little question out there. We're going to see the result or the reaction of the townspeople to the healing. It's a really weird reaction because Jesus has just taken care of two of their worst nightmares. Imagine living in this town and having these two crazy guys, and no matter what the townspeople do, they get their pitchforks and their lanterns and pitchforks, and they go out to try to subdue Frankenstein. They can't, not the doctor, the monster, right? They can't do it. No matter what they do, these guys continue to just terrorize everything. They're out of control, and Christ has removed that from them. So there's all kinds of players here, and when you think about the end healing, sometimes the response isn't what you would actually expect. But again, that's how we humans are. We don't react the right way to Christ as we should. All right, so they're uncontrollable. They go about day and night, like screaming wildly, cutting themselves with these sharp objects. So think about your worst horror movie that you can think of where there's just this absolute screaming and screeching. They're doing this day and night. I mean, they're out of their minds is what they look like, just crazy, and they won't shut up, right? And they're cutting themselves with these sharp objects, right? So they've got, and perhaps the reason why they're cutting themselves, there's a couple different reasons. You might ask why. Well, one reason might be because the demons themselves are using it as sort of a means of torturing their victims, right? It's a self-mutilation, but of course they're not in control, so it's actually demonic mutilation at that point. It's also, though, possible that it's a demonic form of worship, because that is what, back in that time, demon worship would include cutting yourself and then even inserting the name of the demon or the god into the cuts, essentially, as a form of worship. In fact, that's what Jesus was accused of by the Jews later on, much later after he ascended to heaven. Was the reason why he got his powers is because he cut himself and then inserted the names of these false gods in there to give himself power. So this idea of cutting yourself could be related as a form of demonic worship as well. So it's hard to tell exactly what's going on here. The one thing we got to keep in mind here is that, particularly in the modern world, is there are real people that suffer with real mental issues, right? There's a real reality to the fact that there's a struggle. There are physical things that go on that make it difficult. This, on the other hand, is clearly an example of demonic possession causing the issue. So we want to really try to keep those separated, right? There are certain things that medicine can do, and there are certain things that medicine has no control over, and this would be sort of one of those. Now, these guys, they run around, they're naked, they're screaming, they're just wild. They don't take part in any normal human amenities or relationships or fellowship. So these two gentlemen are completely devoid of life. The only life they have is the fact they still got a beating heart. But literally nothing else about these people is human. In fact, they're actually, the way the picture is, they're subhuman. They act like animals. In fact, they don't act just like animals. They act like animals that, like an animal has rabies or something like, right? An animal that's out of its mind. They're even sub-animal in the way that they act. And the only thing left for them is that they actually have life. And that is the only thing. In fact, Satan has removed everything. And we know from John chapter 10:10 that Satan is a thief and he comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And these two men are examples of what Satan tries to do. Like if we look at his purpose in life, they're an example of what he would love to do to everybody if he possibly could, right? So they're at the very far end of where they need to be. Okay, so Jesus sets foot here, and these two men come running out of these caves. And Matthew says this. He says that, and behold, they cried out, "What have you to do with us, O Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now, I want you to kind of keep in mind here, if you just go back and read this carefully, I don't want you to have to necessarily do it right now, but if you go back and read this carefully, notice the switch between the pronouns, because sometimes it's referring to the men themselves, sometimes it's the demons. That's why this can be a little bit of a difficult passage, because here, what do you have to do with us? Did you come to torment us? Well, the torment here is referring to the demons. So this is clearly the demons talking for the men, right? So it's very interesting, but that's their question. What have you to do with us, the Son of God? Second question, have you come here to torment us before the time? So now we got to figure out what in the world do they mean before the time? What is that referring to, right? Mark adds something in here that I think is interesting. He says, for he was saying to him, and this is Jesus was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit," right? He also says this, is that the demon says this. They don't just ask these two questions, but the demon says, "I adjure you by God, do not torment me." Very interesting phrase that the demons use. In fact, when you think about this whole thing has so much irony. It's incredible what is actually going on here. The demons are swearing by God, asking for God to not allow them to be tormented before their time, when in fact it's God that will end up tormented. I mean, it's really weird. But that's what you get, because the demons are powerless at this point. They know they're in a rough shape. So when I said that they're kind of coming to him, they don't really have a choice. When the demons come out in these two men in the tombs, the reason why they do this is because Christ has come there to meet them. They don't have the option to flee. They would if they could. But they know that if they don't do something, Jesus is going to do something to them, and they don't like it. They are at their wits' end. These 6,000 demons that are there, approximately 6,000 demons, they don't have any other option but to beg, pray, and plead for their continuance. Right? You kind of get you get the idea here of what Christ is actually going to be demonstrating, and the utter powerlessness of the satanic realm when it comes to the person of Christ, right? The incredible power that he's going to show here is going to be immense. All right. So, do you have a question? Oh, okay. Do you have a question? Yeah.
When Jesus and the disciples got in the boat to cross over, Jesus knew that where they were going, whether the disciples did or not, but Satan also knew where he was going. It just occurred to me that, man, the demon storm comes up
Mhm.
to stop it, to end it.
Yeah.
Maybe Satan thinks once and for all, but to keep him from going over it to do what he knew he was gonna do. I
Sure.
don't know that the other demons knew he was coming. Maybe they knew what he did to stop the demonic storm, and that's why they came running to him. No,
You know
I
what?
don't know.
There might be a connection there, that they realize that they've already tried to just kill him probably minutes ago, hours ago. We don't know exactly how long the storm stopped before they got to the side, but certainly I think the demonic realm knew what had just happened, that it had failed. So they don't really have an option now, right? So just kind of keep this in mind, because it's a really powerful, powerful scene that we're going to get to here. All right, so and of course, Luke adds in here that, they had broken the chains and shackles, they break the bonds and everything else, right? So there's nothing they could do. So he kind of adds it, but he adds it a little bit later on. Okay.
Randy,
Whoa. Oh, sorry.
hi, before you jump to
Mike,
Luke,
sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead.
before you jump to Luke, back in Mark there, it's just funny. It's very interesting, Jeff's comment on Satan bringing up the storm. And then, these guys are from Satan. These are demonic spirits. And in Mark 5:7, they're crying out to Jesus, Son Most High, and then they invoke the name of God.
That's what I just said. Yeah, no, Mike, you're exactly right.
They invoke the name of God, saying, please, in the name of God, don't torture us.
That's right. In the name of God, don't torture us. I mean,
yeah,
they don't have any other option though, but it is, when you read it, it's really bizarre, because they're pleading for God, they're praying to God that God won't do anything to them. So it's incredible. But here's the other thing. I just want you to keep this in mind. I didn't put this in here in the lesson tonight very much, but just notice here, the divinity of Christ is pretty apparent in this passage. Okay, it's pretty apparent in this passage. We'll get to it a little bit here. Did you have a question, Rich? Go ahead, Jude.
What you just said is that I'm in Keith's prayer, part of his seminary, and he's had us read this book called, what's the name of that book? The one I told you to get? Calling on the Name of the Lord.
Yeah.
Calling on the Name of the Lord by Gary Millar.
Mhm.
And he references in the Old Testament all these instances with this. This is exactly what the Jews did,
Yeah.
how they prayed,
Mhm.
because they had no other option.
Correct.
They were facing, I'm not going to say the similar situation as what these demons are facing in terms of being thrown into the abyss, but they were facing God's judgment.
Mhm.
And they
Yeah.
would call on the name of the Lord.
Which in fact they will at the end of the tribulation. This is exactly what will happen. The Jews that remain after a majority of them are slaughtered, they will recognize Christ as their Messiah, and they will call out for his salvation, because there isn't many more options for them. And when they call out, that is the thing that actually triggers the second coming of Christ. So yes,
Anyway,
it's this
it's
whole nature of calling.
A
Yeah,
bizarre
yeah,
kind of similarity. I don't know.
yeah.
Maybe.
So we've got them here now. These demons say some things that are, I think, important. And I want you to hear some stuff tonight, because when we ask ourselves whether or not we're saved by faith, I'm just gonna leave that here. But I want you to figure out, what is the content of faith, because the content is actually what matters. I'm going to show you something here in a moment that I don't think maybe you've seen before, but I think it will help demonstrate some of these questions that come up about salvation. All right. So the demons ask these two questions. The first one is basically, Jesus, what are you going to do to us? What are you here for? Right? What have you to do with us, O Son of God? What's your plan? We want to know your plan. We're really freaked out right now. We want to know your plan. That's exactly what it is. We are freaked out. and we know something bad's coming, and we just want to know what it is. Like just tell us what is going to happen here. And the second one is a really odd thing to say, unless you actually understand sort of what is going on here. Is, have you come here to torment us before the time? Well, what time are they referring to, right? And what does it mean to be tormented? All right. It can't be good. They want to avoid it. And so we've got to ask that question, because that's what they think is going to happen. They think that Jesus come there and he's going to do something to them that they do not want to happen. And they're trying to avoid it in any way that they possibly can. Those are the two questions, okay? Now, within those two questions, notice what the demons actually acknowledge. Okay, this is what the demons actually believe. They automatically know that he is in fact the Son of God, right? He's divine. They know who he is. The demons always recognize Christ as God. They never have any problems recognizing who he is. It's only people that have a problem recognizing that he's God. It is. The other thing that they recognize is that his coming means their doom, right? They clearly recognize that, right? Okay, so they have faith in that. The words "don't torture me" or "don't torture us before the time" recognize that not only do they have an ultimate doom, but that Jesus has control over them. So not only does his coming spell their doom, but he can do whatever he wants to them. They actually have faith. Think about this here. They have faith. They believe that Jesus is God, that their time is going to come, and that he has control of them and can do whatever he wants. A lot of faith. That's actually more faith than most people have. Now, here's the question. Is that saving faith? Okay, but believe it or not, demons have faith. I'm going to go into this here in just a moment, a little bit more, but I just want you to sort of catch what's going on in their question and what they actually acknowledge is going on, okay? Okay, so there's also some indications here about, that they're aware of his supernatural power. Again, you notice here, one of the things that happen is that when they come out, the men immediately do what? They kneel before Christ. Okay? So these men who are controlled by demons, it's not the men that are doing the kneeling, it's the demons that are actually controlling the men, that are forcing the men to come in a kneeling, prostrate position before Christ. Okay? Now, what that means is they understand who the king is and who's not king. They understand who they're in the presence of, and it's God. Now, they're not kneeling in worship, because the demons don't worship him. But they do kneel in homage, again, the same way that you might kneel to a king or a sovereign. Even if you can't stand them, you're still going to kneel, because if you don't kneel, your head comes off, right? But they are taking the men and kneeling before Christ. The name of Jesus, every knee will bow, in heaven, on earth, under the earth. The sovereign is in the room, and they know that. Okay, so they can do nothing else but kneel in his presence. All right. They also beg. The Greek words that are here are very strong. Beg, plead for their lives. And this strenuous appeal to Jesus not to punish them it demonstrates that they know that he has the power to do stuff and will in fact execute that judgment. And there's a missing P there, on them. Sorry. Okay. They also, again, addressed him as Jesus, Son of the Most High God. So, Rich, exactly what you just mentioned right there. They know he's divine. Okay. That term, Most High God, in the Old Testament is used by the Jews to refer to Yahweh. Okay. Pretty clear that they know you are the Son of Yahweh, right? but also Gentiles use this, and I have some references here that you can see, references here that Gentiles also use that to refer to the superiority of Yahweh over and against the other, false gods that were being put out there. So even the Gentiles would use Most High God as a way to designate Yahweh is supreme. I don't know if you've got this Baal over here, you've got Molech or whatever you want to do. They're nothing like he is the Most High God. That's what I mean. Most High God. That was their way, the Gentiles' way of indicating that. So this right here is clearly indicating that they understand his divinity. Okay. Now, the interesting thing here is that Christ doesn't like to accept testimony from people of bad character. Okay, so even though the demons are saying the right stuff, they're not the people he wants to be saying those things about him, right? So even if it's true, he doesn't like to accept their testimony, okay? Where does that leave us here then? I posed this to you just a minute ago. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever thought about this, but before tonight, if I'd asked you the questions, do demons have faith in Jesus? You probably would have said no. Well, unless I clarified what faith meant. But I mean, faith just means an assent and a reliance on a particular fact as being truth, right? They do have faith. In fact, this is what James says in James chapter 2, 18 and 19, okay? He says, but someone will say, you have demons and well, no, it shouldn't be right, sorry. You have faith. I don't know why that's, I did not type that. You have faith and I have works. So I was going to say, it's not right. You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Okay, that very, very famous passage, right? He says, and then here's the key one. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe, and what? Well, we see them shuddering right now. This is a good example of shuddering. They're literally on their knees shuddering before Christ. So the demons believe, and this is what James is saying here. Yeah, I know you believe that God's one. Great. You believe all of these things about Jesus to be true and God to be true. Great. But that's not saving faith. Saving faith is you placing your faith and trust in your salvation in the fact of the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross and his resurrection from the dead. So you can believe a lot of things about him and not be saved. The demons believe those stuff. The demons know more truth about who Christ is and who God is. They've been in the presence of God than you and I do, probably. They understand things more clearly than what we do in some ways. And yet they don't express faith, right? So it's got to be more than just a hear. It's got to, as James would say, true saving faith is going to be faith that then changes you. And when you're changed, it will be demonstrated by your actions, right? Okay, but if we look at that content of his faith, it's just sort of a wrap up here. They have faith that he's God. They have faith that he has authority to command them, that he'll punish them in future judgment. They have faith that there is, in fact, a place of their destruction, right? The abyss. They actually believe in prayer, because guess what? They just pray to God. I adjure you, by God. That's what it means to pray to God. I swear, God, don't do this. They know how to pray. Not that they do it often, but they know how to pray. So they believe in prayer. They believe that prayer could work. Otherwise, they wouldn't have said anything. They would have just sat there. Okay? They also believe that Jesus can extend mercy, because they asked him, I know you have the authority to do it. I know you should do it, but don't send us to the abyss. Send us to these pigs instead. And I don't know if they expected him to do it or not, but at least they knew he was merciful. And so they were willing to, I mean, just think about this. You've got demons who understand that Christ is merciful, and they're willing to throw themselves on them at his mercy, and they're hoping he'll extend it. It is one of the most bizarre things that I could think of in the scriptures, is to think that they would go do that. And yet, what does he do? He does what they ask. Now, you might wonder why that he did what he asked. I have a thought about why he did it. And we'll get to that here in just a moment. But the fact is, they in fact understand that he is merciful even to the demonic realm, at least for this point. He won't be merciful in the end, but at least at this point, he has extended some mercy to them. Okay. Now, again, their plea here, there we go. That's what James should say. I don't know how that other thing got in there, but maybe it was a little demonic activity going on in the computer. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But literally, their plea is swear to God, is basically what it means, but it should be rendered, I implore you, or I appeal to God. By God's great mercy, we beg you, don't do it. I don't know, it cracks me up a little bit. But it also shows just how much power Christ has and how completely, utterly powerless the demonic realm is in the presence of God, right? All right.
We were asked to pray with supplication, right?
Yeah.
A synonym for supplicate is adjure.
Adjure you. Yeah, yeah. Beg, plead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's what they ask him to do. Now they ask him to say, "Hey, look, don't torment or torture us." Right? Some of your versions will say torment. Some will say torture. They're really the same thing, right? So when we get to the doctrine of hell, one version of the doctrine of hell says that God tortures is the other word for it, people for all of eternity. Okay, that's one version of hell, right? But it's the same word. So people like to try to kind of slice and dice, like torment sort of means one thing, and no, it's the same word, torture, right? And this is what it means. It's actually, the word comes from basanizo, and that just means to test by rubbing on. There's a touchstone. It was a way that you could like purify, and you could find out if things were like metal is purified and things like that. It was a purification method, but it's typically applied in these types of actions here to to question someone by applying torture. Think of waterboarding, think of whatever other form of torture that you can have. It's exactly what it is. You're literally torturing the individual to question them, to harass or distress, right? And it's used again in different areas, right? Like in when they're struggling in the boat against the wind and waves, that's called being tormented. They're literally being, in this case, mentally and physically tormented by the storm. They're trying to get past. This is what they're asking Jesus not to do. Do not torture us before our time. Now, I find it really interesting that they know there is a time, because the question is, don't torture us. The question is just, don't torture us before our time. Okay? So there is an assuredness on the part of the demonic realm that judgment is coming. Just don't make it right now, because I've got things I want to do, right? Is essentially what they're saying. Okay, now let's talk about what this is. What are they asking Jesus to not do to them in the moment? Because what they think is he's going to cast them out, and immediately when they cast them out, he's going to send them, the word that's used there is the abyss. So what in the world is the abyss? Okay. Now, when we think of the underworld or Sheol, there's kind of there's really kind of 4 compartments, and there's a lot of confusion here. And some people only think there's 3, but that's because they're confused on hell. Hell and Sheol are not the same. There's clearly different words for them in Scripture. And so hell and the lake of fire, that is the final destination of demonic angels, Satan, and all the unrighteous. But guess what? Nobody, nobody, there are no sinners in hell right now. No one's in hell. There are no angels in hell right now. That is actually a future judgment at the great white throne judgment, when the sinners are cast there. And then, of course, you're going to have Satan. You're going to have You're gonna have the false prophet, right? You're gonna have the beast. They all get thrown into the hell and the lake of fire. So that is a future destination, not populated yet. Okay, but not hell. So what it is though, so Sheol's not hell. And the reason why some people get it confused is they confuse and conflate hell and Sheol. It's not the case. Sheol and Hades, Hades is the Greek word, Sheol is the Hebrew word. They don't refer to hell, right? Which is Gehenna, right? Completely different words and completely different things. Okay. So they're not talking about hell or the lake of fire. What this is talking about here is the components of the underworld or Sheol that are sort of prior to that. Now, let me go through the kind of 4 different components for you, and you can see then what it is that they're asking Jesus not to do. So the first component of Sheol, again, Sheol is really the place of the dead, is the primary understanding of that. And the first compartment of that is called Abraham's bosom. Now, in the Old Testament, in fact, all the way through until the resurrection of Christ, every believer went to Abraham's bosom. And it's pleasant. It's called paradise, right? And you read that in Luke, right? This is where it's talked about. Abraham's bosom is talked about in Luke, right? Now, the reason why believers prior to the resurrection of Christ could not go directly to heaven is because, remember, the atonement hadn't been made. And it said that the blood of Christ sprinkled the heavenly tabernacle, cleansed it. So until his atonement had been made, the righteous wouldn't be able to go into the presence of God. It's only after the atonement of the Son of God for the sins of the righteous that the atonement had been made, that then they could now go into the presence of God. In fact, Hebrews, that's the point of Hebrews chapter 1 through 4, okay? And the writer of Hebrews says this, "For since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who draw near." In other words, you couldn't, under the Mosaic law, be perfect. You could be righteous. You could be a believer, right? You'd be saved. But you couldn't be perfect, right? Okay. Otherwise, would they not have ceased to be offered, since the worshipers, having once been cleansed, would no longer have any consciousness of sins, right? And that's what he's saying there. It's like, look, if you could have become perfected to then be in the presence of God, then you wouldn't have to offer the sacrifices over and over again. You couldn't get perfection from there. Therefore, you can't be in the presence of God until a perfect sacrifice is made on your behalf, right? Okay. But in these sacrifices, they're a reminder of sins every year, for it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. We know that the sacrificial system in the Old Testament merely covered a person's sin, so that God's wrath essentially was delayed or not put onto that individual, but it didn't take the sins away. What removes the sins of the believer is the blood of Christ. The Old Testament sacrifices can merely cover it so that God's wrath would not fall on the individual.
Sanctified at that point in Abraham's bosom.
It all depends on what you mean by sanctified. So
Holy.
they're holy, they're righteous, they're holy, but they're not perfected, because the blood of the animal sacrifices would cover their sins. God's wrath would not be then put on them. But to remove and not just cover, it took the blood of Christ. Once the blood of Christ came, then their sins are totally removed, and now they are perfected. And when they die as a believer, they can now go straight to be with God. Okay, so
when I die,
yes.
and then it goes straight to the presence of God, because I will be at that point sanctified, does that mean the same as perfected?
Yeah, and then sanctified, I wouldn't use the word sanctified in the way that you're using it. And sorry, I don't want to get off on that. We can,
Sanctification.
yeah, but you're never going to become, you're never going to,
No,
yes.
forever.
Well, in this life, there's a process of sanctification, but you're never going to reach the ultimate of that. But Christ's blood is applied, it covers all of your sins, so that when you die, your sins now have been removed. They've been cast as far away as the east is from the west, so that you can now go directly into the presence of Christ. Now, my whole point here is this. Sorry, I don't want to get off onto the night.
Just, whether that's sanctification or being perfected.
Sanctification is the daily ongoing work of the Spirit in your life to continue to eradicate sin and to draw you closer to the image of Christ. Okay, that's sanctification. Atonement is the removal of your sins by the blood of Christ, where he has paid the price for your sins so you don't have to, your sins are removed, not just covered. That was my whole point. My whole point here is this, is that up until the time Christ was resurrected from the dead, every believer, when they died, and they would go to Sheol, they would go to Abraham's bosom. Okay, that's where they would be at. Now, when Christ died and was resurrected, his blood now covers that. And now, as a believer, you don't go to Abraham's bosom. Abraham's bosom is completely empty right now. No one goes there because they go directly to the presence of God. Yes, yeah.
So atonement is the result of Christ's shed blood.
Correct.
So I'm thinking, who was the first person to enter the kingdom of heaven? Was it the thief on the cross? Was it, I mean, his disciples believed who he was, right? That he was the Son of God, but he hadn't died on the cross yet, right? So did they? I mean, it's kind of a,
Yeah, I tell you,
it's kind of a rabbit trail conversation, but
it is. Let me answer it quickly so that we can make sure we finish on
Yeah.
time.
Well, then
The-
just keep
so,
going.
well, no.
We can talk
Here,
about-
here's the quick thing. When Christ died, and he goes down to Sheol. Christ never went to hell because, again, no one's in hell, so he never went to hell. This whole thing that the Apostles' Creed that he descended to hell, it's not in the scriptures. He went to Sheol, and when he went to Sheol, he went to Abraham's bosom, and he preached the glory of what he had just accomplished. And guess what? You're now not going to be here. You're going to be with God. That's what he's preaching, right? The glory of the gospel to them. Now, some say he also preached to the people that are in the bad side of Sheol. We can get to that later on. But my point is this, Rich, to answer your question quickly. The people that were in Abraham's bosom, they're the first ones that went to heaven, because until he was resurrected, and now someone that's still living could believe in him, and they die. In other words, you understand what I'm saying? Like, the order of events is the Old Testament saints were taken from Abraham's bosom up into heaven. All right. Anyway,
So
that
his the blood and the resurrection.
well, no, his blood atoned. His resurrection provides for your eternal life. Okay. Gosh, we'll tell you what. When we end this here, because I think it's really important to understand. People want to know, why did he have to die and be resurrected? Both, they don't do the same thing. They don't do the same thing. Theologically, they're completely they're different. That's why Paul calls the resurrection of Christ the first fruits. Anyway, so we'll get to that. Okay, hold on a sec here. Hold on. So compartment number 2 then of Sheol is what we call it the bad side. This is where all the unrighteous, when they die, they go to the bad side of Sheol. They don't go to hell, they go to Sheol, and that continues on until the final judgment. So when someone who is not a believer, who's unrighteous, dies, they go to Sheol, and they go to this bad side where they're held in confinement. They will eventually be resurrected, brought out of Sheol, resurrected, given new bodies, and then stand before Christ at the final judgment, and then they will be thrown into a new place, their ultimate destination, which is the lake of fire or hell. That's the order of operations. All right. And again, you see this here in Luke chapter 16, where you have the rich man and Lazarus story, and this is Abraham talking to the rich man. The rich man wants him to, come on over, and he's pleading for, dip your finger in a cup of water. But Abraham said, "Child, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. And besides all this, between us and you a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who had passed from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. So clearly, Christ is representing this idea of Sheol, the place of the dead. There's Abraham's bosom for the righteous, and there's this bad side for the unrighteous. Okay, that's compartment 2. Now, compartment 3, we still haven't gotten to the abyss yet, but I'm just painting for you the different compartments that are available in Scripture to describe this sort of otherworldly state or place. The third one is called Tartarus. That's the Greek word, is Tartarus. And this is the permanent place of confinement for fallen angels until they are removed from Tartarus and thrown into the lake of fire for their destruction. Okay, so, and these are specifically angels that left their abode. They're the ones in Genesis chapter 6 who intermarried with women and created this Nephilim, right? And because of their sexual sin with women, they were then confined to this place called Tartarus. And they are not able to get out because of the horrendous nature of their sin, which was to corrupt the human line and therefore prevent the Messiah from coming. Because of the horrendous nature of their sin, God condemned them to Tartarus, and they have been there since Genesis chapter 6. Okay, Jude references this in the flood was God's judgment to wipe out their offspring, essentially. Okay, now Jude chapter 5 through 7. It's a great book, by the way. It is. Jude chapter 5 says this. It says, "Now I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved a people..."
Jude 1.
Something is really strange here because I copied this straight out of the Bible. I didn't type this here, but that should not. Anyway, in the angels, let's skip to verse 6 because actually verse 6 is where it's important. I don't know what's going on here. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, okay, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under the gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality. In other words, these angels involved in sexual immorality, just like those in Sodom and Gomorrah, and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. So what Jude is talking about here, he's talking about Tartarus. These angels who left their abode, right, and engaged in sexual immorality against the natural nature of things, God then has bound them up in these eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. That's Tartarus. I don't know how many fallen angels are there, but there's definitely some, and they have been hating life ever since they made the wrong move. Now, compartment number 4, this is what these demons that are possessing these individuals, this is what they're asking Jesus not to. They're not asking them to put them in, not to put them in Tartarus, right? They are asking him to not send them to the abyss, right? Now, the abyss is a temporary place of confinement. Unlike Tartarus, which is permanent, the abyss is temporary. And God, for his own reasons throughout history, may and will put demons into the abyss for some period of time as a temporary confinement, right? And they will then be released from the abyss, unlike the ones that are in Tartarus, for some purpose that God has planned, okay? Now, we see this in Revelation chapter 9. The demons that come out that are released from the abyss in Revelation chapter 9 have been locked in the abyss for some period of time. God unleashes them to do harm upon the earth. This is what they don't want to do. They don't want Jesus to put them into some sort of temporary confinement because that could last for a long time. And if you're put into the abyss, you have no freedom. The demons are free. They're free to, walk around the earth. They're free, right? You'll be locked in confinement and you cannot possess anybody. So this is really solitary confinement for some period of time, and they do not want it. That is their ultimate fear at this point, is not to be locked in there. So if you look at Revelation chapter 9, I'm not really going to go through it, but this is where, it talks about the key to the shaft at the bottom is pit. He opened the shaft, and the shaft arose, and smoke came up, and then came the locusts on the earth and given power like scorpions and blah blah blah. And so these are these demons that come out, and they this is Apollyon and Abaddon, and they come and they do all these different things, and are incredibly destructive to the earth and mankind. But this is the example of what they are trying to avoid. Okay, so with that said, then they ask him, do not send us into the abyss. Now, interesting enough, I think there's so much irony in this. If you go back and read, there's so much irony in this story. One of the ironies here is this, is that the abyss typically was thought of as a watery or shadowy place, this abyss. Just think about what they've just done, the irony of this whole thing. Don't send us to the abyss, send us into the herd of pigs. But when they send them in the herd of the pigs do what? They go into a watery abyss, or, they kill themselves, right? So the place they didn't want to go, they didn't end up going to the abyss, but certainly, I mean, there's some irony to what happens here. And I think Jesus probably just chuckling to himself like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll put you into the pigs. See what the pigs do, right? And see what the end result of that is. All right. Okay, I got to get going here because we are really we're behind here. Jesus asked these demons, what is your name? Okay, now remember I told you that that the common Jewish practice, and even Jesus uses this on occasions, is that in order to exorcise a demon, you have to ask what the demon's name is, right? And that gives you power over the demon. Of course, he didn't do that to the blind and mute man who he exorcised the demon out of, which is why the unpardonable sin came about. So he avoided the common way. In this case, he goes back to the normal way of doing exorcism, which is finding out the name. And of course, he asks him, what's your name? And the demon responds, my name is Legion, for we are many. Now, legion is this Latin term that the Romans used, and it meant a company of 6,000 Roman soldiers. So whether or not there were 6,000 demons, or whether or not the term legion is being used in a more general sense to say a bunch of them, like a whole bunch, we're not quite sure there, but certainly there was thousands of these demons, whatever that final count is, in these two individuals. I mean, no wonder these guys can't be shackled and things like that. So anyway, but you notice also that he says, my name is Legion, for many. It's really interesting. This goes back to the fact that whoever's doing the lead speaking here in the demonic part is the leader. He's the ringleader, but he's speaking for these other thousands of them that are there. Now, again, very quickly, there's some pigs that are there feeding in the area, and I just love this. The demons begged him, saying, if you cast us out, send us away into that herd of pigs. And Jesus says, go. So he listens to them. He does what they want him to do. And they went into the pigs, and behold, the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the waters. Okay. Again, the fact that there are pigs there tells us that we're in Gentile territory, in that, Mark states here that there's about 2,000 pigs that ended up dying. So whether or not it was just one demon per pig, or whether there was, 3 demons per pig, we're not really sure, but that is the case, or that there's a huge herd of these that ended up going into the water. All right. Now, think about the reaction here. We're going to wrap this up here. I want you to think about the 2 different reactions that we have to this incredible exorcism of these 2 individuals, right? You've got the response of the townspeople, then you got the response of at least one of the men is recorded, right? So when these pig herders see this, they leave and they go back to town. They create such a ruckus and roar. Now again, you've got 2,000 pigs. So that was a livelihood of probably not just them, but many in the town. Correct. So when they go back, people are really upset. Like, Jesus just come in and ruined their financial situation here. So they come back, and they see that he's in his right mind, and they ask him, beg him to leave out of fear. Now, if you think about it, if you didn't know what their response would have been, if it had just been the pig herders went back to the town and told everything they'd known, what would you have thought the response would have been? Correct. Think back on John chapter 4 when the Samaritan woman went back to town and told them everything that Jesus had said to her. And guess what? The town came out and many of the Samaritans believed. So you would think that this town that's had to sit there and shake in their boots at these two guys that are just completely destroying everything. They'd tried everything they can. All of a sudden they're sitting there. They go out and they see them. They're in the right minds. They're fully clothed, right? And instead of them being like, thank you, Jesus, for delivering us from these guys, whatever else, the only thing they can think of is the money they've just lost because their herd's now drowned in the sea. And they beg him to go. Don't do anything more for us. We don't want what you have. Go away. This is a they beg Jesus to go. Yes, they beg Jesus to go. Okay. That's one reaction to Jesus. You can see what he does. You can see how he's touched people. You can see the miracles that he's done. You can see the change he does in people's lives. And yet you can still tell him to go take a hike. Because I don't like what you're going to do to my life. I don't like what you did. You ruined my livelihood. Go away, Jesus. This is what the townspeople do, and it's what many people do, regardless of the actual evidence for what Christ has done. Okay? Now, the other result is the result of the man. Remember, he's healed, and he begs Jesus to let him go with him. He is ready to hop in that boat. He is a willing disciple. He is on fire. He is on fire. And Jesus says, no, go back to your own town and your villages and proclaim what the Lord has done. And the man does it. Now, here's the odd thing about this. Just again, there's some funny stuff about this story. There are requests. There's 3 requests that are made in this story. One by the demons. Jesus grants the request. One by the townspeople, the angry townspeople. Jesus grants the request. One by the person he's just healed, who is a rabid disciple for him, and guess what? Declines the request. There's just some funniness to about this. And the fact is that sometimes God says to believers, no, you can follow me, but I'm going to ask you to follow me a different way, right? So I just find that to be interesting.
He's breaking the ground for Paul.
Sure. And in fact, this individual here is the first. He's the first example, and I shouldn't have passed by that. He's the first example that we have, if he is a Gentile, and I think that it's probably clear that he is. He would be the first Gentile convert in a Gentile territory. Remember, the Roman centurion was Gentile, and he was a convert. In fact, Jesus said, I haven't seen this much, any faith that is this strong in all of Israel, but he was in Jewish territory. This is the first time that we have a Gentile in Gentile territory that has, in fact, and then to the Gentile, correct. Now, I put the slide in here just for you. Just some application here.
Good. I love it.
Yeah, when you take a look at this here, there's 3 groups of influences on people today. There's what Satan tries to accomplish. What does he want to do? He wants to kill, steal, and destroy. He wants to rob you of your sanity, your self-control, your joy. I mean, he literally wants, if he could, he'd want to make everybody just like those 2 guys. That's one influence that we have. We've got society. Society doesn't know what to do with people that are in need. So we shun them, we isolate them, we decide we don't want to have anything to do with them, we run away, right? And then we've got Jesus. Jesus comes to those in need, restores sanity, joy, fellowship, right relationship with others, and a right relationship with God and with himself. There's only one of those 3 influences that actually matters, that's important to us, and that is the relationship with Jesus Christ and what he does for each one of us and what he can do in transforming us from being people that are on one end of the spectrum in desperate need of him to those who enjoy this incredible health and relationship with Christ. All right. So that is the story that we covered tonight. And again, Jesus is proving his power over that. Remember in the past, there's been a demon that's been possessed this man or a demon here. Just think about all of these demons in these two men. So Christ is not showing that, is not only just showing that he is stronger than a demon, like as a one-to-one battle, like I can get in a ring. He's really showing by this whole legion thing here, which is again, the reason why I want to get back to this, the reason why I think he asked for the name when he didn't have to. What is your name? Everyone that you can hear it, we are legion because we are many. It's important that Jesus establishes that what I'm going to do right now isn't just me against, mano y mano or man, man against angel, whatever. It's not just a one-to-one. This is a one-to-many, and I'm going to completely destroy the many. That is the power that I'm going to display. Now, you might ask, why didn't he just exorcise the demons and the demons just go? I mean, he did the other exorcisms, we don't know where the demons go. They just leave and the person is in their right mind. But here, he specifically grants the request and they go into these pigs. Now, some people have had issues with it. Well, Jesus, you killed 2,000 pigs. I mean, how bad of you to do this? Like they get all in this, I don't know, animal rights type of stuff. We won't go down that road. But they get in this whole thing over here and complain about it. Why did he do that? Because it would be clear to everybody what has just happened. As soon as those two men are exercised, boom, they're in the right state of mind. It is crystal clear to everybody those two guys are demonless. But it could be that they just had a demon in them. Well, the rabbis could exorcise a demon. Even Jesus says that. By what power do your Pharisees do it by? So allowing them to go into this huge herd of pigs would demonstrate that it's not just a demon that he's exorcising, but it would show everybody that he has conquered this incredible, large demonic realm because of all the pigs. Not just one pig goes squealing down down the cliff and jumps off. They all do it. That's a lot of demons that came out of these two guys. So there's a lot to sort of learn here, but it's the power of Christ over the satanic realm that proves that in fact he's not demon possessed and that his power comes from God. And that is the purpose of that. Okay, next week we'll get into his power over sickness. And again, it'll be some similar themes that we will see about how he now demonstrates his incredible power after being accused of having that power come from Satan. Okay, all right. Yeah, one more question and then we'll end it there. Yeah, one question here.
Well, does somebody online have a question? I will yield if there's someone online.
Does someone online have a question?
Yeah. I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Steve, right?
Yeah. So is there evidence here that Jesus, because he was Jewish, had some anti-bacon bias?
Well, I mean, as a Jew, yeah. As a Jew, you weren't allowed to eat pigs or keep pigs or touch pigs. So
Right.
I mean, there's some pigs were unclean under the Mosaic law. So as a Jew, he would not have been able to eat, touch, or do anything. So the fact that he sent these unclean spirits into these unclean animals, I think is pretty telling. Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand why there was pigs in terms of establishing geographically where he was and such, but that's an interesting thought as well.
Yeah.
Did the pigs perish when they?
It said they all drowned.
Yeah.
Yeah, they all drowned. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. We will see you next week. Again, we'll look at the healing of that Christ does, and I think that'll give us a nice little kind of 1, 2, 3 punch that will show his superiority over the satanic realm. So until next week, we'll see you. Thanks everyone that's online.
Hey, Randall.
Right.
I